The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free.
Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Right now I'm going to attempt to examine the Bible and dissect some of the churchy language we can really easily take for granted, digging into history and languages as I'm able anyway to try and get at the heart of the text so that we can hopefully see and then apply at least some of what God has for you and me in these words today. Now, I'm not formally trained in Scripture. I'm just a guy using resources and a questioning mind to try and get at the truth, and that's something that we can all do, so I hope that you'll be doing that with me. We've been studying through the book of Colossians and have arrived now at chapter 2, verses 16 through 19, which in the ESV reads, "Therefore let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink or with regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Let no one disqualify you, insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by his sensuous mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God." Now, I usually, when I present my notes, put the geek application section as kind of its own thing at the end, but in making my notes this time, it made a bit more sense to incorporate those geek application points along the way. So just a minor change this time. Looking at verse 16 again to start off, 16 says, "Therefore let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink or with regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath." Paul was likely referring to some emphasis being promoted in Colossae on Mosaic law regulations, but possibly also to the developing pagan-inspired worldview in Colossae. The Colossian Christians were being pressured in some way to change their dietary and other regulatory habits. To pass judgment here refers to evaluating someone standing before God and whether he approves or does not approve of what they are doing. Now, although this verse names some specific things, I believe that its broader principle intended for us to apply is this: we are not to allow other Christians to claim that God is displeased with something we are doing if their reasoning is based on culture and tradition or the assumption that we must still obey Mosaic regulations. Likewise, in Galatians 5:1, Paul writes, "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery." And in Romans 14:16, he writes, "Do not let what you regard as good to be spoken of as evil." Now, as Christians, and specifically as geeks, we are not to cling to our freedom merely to pursue pleasure, or to do so without any sensitivity toward what may tempt others around us to sin. But we should be constantly evaluating, reevaluating our own habits, comparing them with Scripture, making changes where appropriate, and being prepared to have patient, humble, and biblical conversations with Christians who express concern or criticism regarding hobbies or patterns that we believe are good and useful parts of our lives. This doesn't need to be a tense, confrontational experience. I know it can easily become that, and I've experienced that many times myself. It's hard to keep it from becoming that just as a default, but it doesn't need to be that. Instead, it can start with our response being to ask, "I'm having trouble kind of following you. Can you tell me where you're coming from in Scripture on that idea?" And with Scripture as our common ground, that's which all believers should have, we can then look at Scripture together and try to figure out how and why we're seeing things differently. And if appropriate, we should also be prepared to say at least, I'm not sure if I agree with you, but that is definitely some Scripture I'll want to look at and consider more. It's almost never the case that someone who's taking a stance on something is going to change their view right then and there in a conversation. And so we shouldn't be expecting that from people that we're kind of talking to about concerns that we have with them. And, we shouldn't expect that, that we shouldn't stick to holding our ground if we sense that there's maybe something here to think about. But neither do we have to right then and there say, "You're right," and change our minds. These are real issues that are worth a lot of thought. And so I think sometimes the best way to end those conversations is to say, I don't think I agree with you on this, but you've given me some stuff I do want to think about and look at more deeply, and I think that's a very great and productive way for these kinds of conversations to end. Okay, verse 17 then says, these are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Paul essentially says that issues regarding food, drink, holidays, seasonal traditions, and the Sabbath, even those that the Mosaic Law gives instruction on, are a shadow of the things to come, he says. This metaphor of shadows could also be thought of as foreshadows in terms of the way it's used, or smaller hints of something more substantial coming later. The same language is used in Hebrews 8:5 and Hebrews 10:1, which identify both the tabernacle, which was the basis for the temple, and all associated laws and worship as a shadow of the good things to come instead of the true form of these realities. I think that's Hebrews 10:1, maybe that's 8:5, I can't remember, but it's one of those verses. So there was genuine value in them when they were used, when Israel was under the Mosaic covenant, and there's still value in them now as objects of learning. But the true substance that those things all pointed to was found and fulfilled in Jesus. So obligating ourselves to those laws and regulations is like choosing to skip dinner and just lean over and smell it and then be done, instead of actually enjoying a real meal which actually has useful substance for our bodies. Verse 18 now says, let no one disqualify you, insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up with reason by his, without reason by his sensuous mind. The Greek phrase translated here as disqualify you is actually among the most puzzling for New Testament scholars, but the common net result of all interpretations as I looked at them seems to be the idea of someone denying your claim to being devoted to Jesus. Paul does not want his readers to allow anyone to deny their claim to being a dedicated Christian on the grounds of these substanceless things. The Greek translated as asceticism here, as elsewhere in other translations, conveys there the idea of delighting in false humility. I think that's actually maybe the more common idea expressed in translation. So the ESV might kind of be departing a little bit from what's popular in others there. But anyway, this might have been connected to the worship of angels being referenced here. You might remember that the Rising worldview in Colossae proposed the existence of numerous spiritual beings, of which Jesus was only one, and equal with, not greater than, those other spiritual beings. And so those subscribing to this view may have presented their prayer to angels or lesser spiritual beings as an act of humility. Of course, I would never presume to pray to or worship the ultimate God himself, there's even, I think, a similar idea maybe in the veneration of saints, prayers to saints and stuff like that in some of the more traditional strands of Christianity that I think have some commonality with what's going on here. But this type of humility, if that's what's motivating it, it actually devalues and disregards the worth of Christ's sacrifice, which alone is what makes it possible for us to have direct relationship with the ultimate Creator and God. Of course, we should never as Christians think that, on our own merit, we can presume to have any kind of interaction and relationship with the God of the universe. It's not on our merit. It's on the shockingly given merit of Christ on our behalf that makes that interaction possible. But certainly as Christians, we can also fall into having false humility that's not related to this veneration of saints or worship of other spiritual beings or whatever, but is actually false humility that's in some way serving our own sense of self-righteousness. So it is an important point, I think, for self-examination as we look at this verse, even as we maybe tend to think of non-Christians when we look at it. The visions that Paul refers to, that were kind of this person that he was criticizing, this type of person he was criticizing, would go on about their visions and stuff. They were apparently an example of the kind of spiritual talk that was common among proponents of this rising counterfeit philosophy. The picture painted is of someone who talks a lot, giving weight and value to their own words, when in truth their words are inflated air without substance or good reasoning, based on a mind that is influenced by the pursuit of personal desires and interests that maybe are not even being recognized by them. It seems to have a fair resemblance to the vague and illogically quote-unquote inclusive pop spirituality of today, I think. However, as Christians, we can also give too much weight and too much talking time to spiritual or quote-unquote mountaintop experiences we believe we've had, giving them a louder voice to guide us in life than Scripture itself. I personally have come to conclude that some of those really impactful, sometimes seemingly supernatural mountaintop experiences are better categorized in our lives as attention getters. And then after that, the true guidance we receive ought to be found on something based in Scripture and in reasoning through that with Scripture with other believers. Okay, verse 19. And not holding fast, still describing this person, that we don't want to be like, not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God. Earlier in this chapter, Paul emphasized the sufficiency and superiority of Jesus Christ when compared to all the alternative spiritual beings that others may appeal to. Having established that, Paul points out the major problem in not holding fast to Jesus, who is, as he says, the head. The collection of God's people who are meant to function together is referred to as Christ's body in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 12 is one of the most well-known examples of that. And Christ is also referred to as the head of his body, the church, even in Colossians 1:18. He is the head in the sense of being the ultimate source of life and direction for the body. So Paul warns here against those who would try to criticize and direct Christians while they themselves are not truly remaining connected to the source of life and direction for the church, which is Christ himself. And yet, this was really interesting. It kind of popped out when I was reading the text this time. Christ is not the sole source of life, or rather, maybe better said, he's not the direct source of life in every sense. Notice that in this metaphor for the church as Christ's body, the whole body is nourished through its joints and ligaments. Now, whether these joints and ligaments represent believers or our connections to other believers, the resulting implication is the same. If we want to experience nourishment and life from Jesus, we have got to be connected to his body, the church. And according to Paul's letters, the church is meant to function as a localized group of people. Long-distance connection with other believers, even though we try to have that and can have it to some degree, just as Paul did when he was writing these letters to church bodies that he was, far removed from, there can be some form of connection there, and certainly arguably more so in today's age of the internet. But if we look at how the church functions, how Paul talks about his relationships with people in the church, in the New Testament letters, it's always considered to be falling short of the togetherness we're meant to experience when believers are physically apart. Now, I realize that this is a drum that I beat on a lot, but honestly, it's something I need to say out loud to myself as much as to any other hermit geeks like me who might be listening to this. Our true life and sustenance as believers, which we shouldn't always expect it to feel refreshing and wonderful and, filling us up. Sometimes the way we gain life from being around other believers feels like a workout routine. It takes some effort to be built up, or feels like, swallowing that huge, I have these big multivitamins that, man, I'd never like trying to get those things down, But there are life-giving things that are not always pleasurable, but nevertheless are just vital to us. And being a part of the church, while many times it can be encouraging and life-giving and sustaining, can be difficult as well. Either way, our life and sustenance as believers is only found in a reasonably healthy local church. As verse 19 reveals, that is where we grow with the growth that is from God. If you'd like some help finding a good church in your area, I would love to help you do that if I can. Online resources and communities are good supplements, but by nature, they just can't speak to your particular situation like relationships in a local church can. The context for almost everything in the New Testament assumes that we're serving and building purposeful relationships in a local church. So whether you're in a church that just kind of lacks Bible-based intentionality or maybe not attending any church at all, if I can help you get connected to an authentic, compassionate, Bible-oriented church, I want to do that. You can email me at paeter@spiritblade.com, and we can look at some websites of churches in your area together. It is time again for Christian Geek Central's annual Game Save event, fundraising for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which provides free treatment for children facing life or death circumstances and shares its cutting-edge life-saving research with hospitals all over the world. You're still welcome to join the Game Save team by following the link in the description below. And once again this year, I'm drawing attention to our team's fundraising by performing a 24-hour marathon of video gaming that I will stream live on youtube.com/Christian Geek Central beginning 6 a.m. Pacific Time on Saturday, November 5th. You can donate or get more info by clicking on my fundraising page in the links below, where you'll also find incentives and rewards for doing so. For $5, choose a topic for me to share my sometimes overly strong opinions on during my live stream. For $10, you get the previous reward and a download code for a free copy of the Spirit Blade Special Edition audio drama. For $20, you get the previous rewards and you can choose a game for me to play during my November 5th live stream, pick a favorite, or torture me with something terrible or rage-inducingly difficult. For $30, you get the previous rewards and you can choose a song for me to sing during my November 5th live stream, pick an old favorite of yours, or just make me humiliate and torture myself with something no one wants to hear. And for $50, you get the previous rewards and a download code for every MP3 product at spiritblade.com. That's a $90 value. On top of that, I have set fundraising milestones that will unlock strange and unusual happenings as I reach them. At $200, I'll have a free download day for everyone who visits spiritblade.com on November 12th. And as my total goes beyond $200, I'll unlock increasingly more content for the free download day. And depending on how far beyond $200 my fundraising goes, during my November 5th live stream, I will cover my face in peanut butter and jelly while talking about horror movies, put on a pair of frozen socks and a frozen t-shirt at the same time, shoot water up my nose with a turkey baster, and have my wife Holly play a video game with me for 30 minutes. And if I reach a personal fundraising total of $500 or more, I will resume and complete, before the end of the year, my live stream Let's Play series for Fallout New Vegas as a Terminator. I like your gun. Attempting to do so in a single sitting. That could take as much as 20 hours or more based on how long tobeat.com averages. We will find out together if I reach $500. Finally, if I reach my $500 goal by the end of Thursday, October 20th, I will do a 4-hour live stream before the end of the year, playing only the most frustratingly difficult games in my collection. Since my last Get Good live stream, I've added some more titles to the list that will probably be like beating my face against a wall, and you can bring that about if you help me reach $500 by the end of October 20th. Now, there are some stipulations and time limits on those rewards and milestones, so quickly follow the link below to my fundraising page for all the details. I hope you'll be a part of helping me and the Christian Geek Central Game Save team do some good for some kids who really need it. And then please join me at youtube.com/Christian Geek Central for my 24-hour marathon starting at 6 a.m. Pacific Time on Saturday, November 5th. Hope to see you then.
Oh my gosh. This is all kinds of wrong.